And it's recording.
And now it's recording. And you can zoom with this thing right here. Zoom in, zoom out.
Okay.
So most of the time we're just going to keep it zoomed on the screen there.
Okay.
Hey, it's Mr. Willis coming to you from afar with Chrissy Billman. Chrissy,
Yeah.
say hey.
Hey.
That's Chrissy. She's the only person in here. Study hall. So we're going to talk today about bacteria. Isn't that fun? Okay, can you see this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, y'all need to open your books to page 516. Whoever's subbing here, I think it's Miss Devino, make them do that. We'll give you a second. Page 516. And, can you see me?
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about bacteria. See the little bacteria? Okay. So we're good?
Yeah.
Alright. So, I'm going to do this pretty quick so you can do your reading. And, hey, I'm probably hitting a golf ball right now. Think about that. I'm in two places at once. Magic. Okay. Page 516, chapter 18. Oh, by the way, I'll give you your test back tomorrow. They're pretty good. Some of you. Some of you, awful. Okay, so anyway, these are bacteria. I introduced you to bacteria last time. Tiny creatures, almost invisible. Chrissy, how big are bacteria?
They're really small.
Really small. See, she said that. Here's three different types we're studying. Archaebacteria, You Bacteria. Here's a couple of types of You Bacteria. These are heterotrophic You Bacteria, and these are autotrophic You Bacteria. Hopefully you know what those words mean. Heterotrophic means you have to eat other things. Autotrophic means you make your own food. So how big are these things? Well, here is a pen, like a tack that you stick in a tack board. And if you look close enough at the tip of that, this is what it would look like under an electron microscope. That's the tip of a pen. And every little orange thing you see there is a bacterium. Really, really small. And the purple thing is the tip of the pen. And I know you look at that and you say, but Mr. Willis, it's flat. It's not, it doesn't look like the tip of a pen. But if you were to look close enough at the tip of a pen, it would be flat. That's the magic of the electron microscope. So, bacteria are really small. And by the way, we're also going to study viruses. And viruses are so small that about 10,000 viruses could fit in one bacterium for small viruses, which is pretty amazing. So anyway, bacteria, small creatures, viruses even smaller. In atoms, if you remember we studied atoms and molecules, one bacterium is made up of millions of atoms. So atoms are really, really small. So anyway, here are some of the things you read in your introduction about You Bacteria. You Bacteria are, You means true. This is what we call the true bacteria. Strong cell walls that contain Peptidoglycan. Some of them have a second cell wall. If you're wondering what Peptidoglycan is, it's a molecule made of hexagon after hexagon. Sugars attached in hexagons, and the sugars are attached to one another by little polypeptide strings. That's like a little protein attaching two sugars together. Remember protein? We studied proteins, chains of amino acids. That's a little amino acid chain that hooks the sugar groups together. So that's what peptidoglycan is, and you only find it on You Bacteria. You don't find it on the Archaea. Here's another microscope view of bacteria that are in the intestines. Bacteria in the intestines of a human. These are the intestinal cells here. But these little black things are all bacteria. So you got these things living inside your intestines. Isn't that gross? Is that gross, Chrissy?
Yeah, it's really gross.
She says it's gross. So, those are the You Bacteria, and it talks more about them in your book on page 516, 517. And then there are the Archaea. Archaea, or Archaebacteria they're also called, they are all found in weird locations, strange places. We have your thermoacidophiles. They live in hot, acidic environments, like the hot springs in Yellowstone. I don't know if you've ever been there. I'll show you some pictures from there that I took on a trip, a family vacation. It was just like the movie Vacation, if you ever saw that. And then the halophiles live in salty environments. And then there's the methanogens that can't live if there's oxygen around. We say that they're anaerobic. And they produce methane, by the way, as a byproduct. Methane is a gas, a flammable gas. And so your thermoacidophiles, your halophiles, and your methanogens, they're all together called extremophiles. Bacteria or archaea that only live in extreme places, places that are real hard to live in. And I'll show you some of those places. Here is a Yellowstone. I don't know if you've ever been to Yellowstone. Probably not. But if you have, it's pretty cool. It's basically a bunch of land that sits right on top of a volcano with liquid hot magma. And it heats up. The magma comes up and heats up the water and makes it real hot. And you can see all this steam coming off. It also makes it real acidic. And you would think there wouldn't be any living things there. Here's one of those hot pools. This is boiling water, but the blue color that you see is made by archaea that are living in that water, even though it's boiling temperature and it's very acidic. There's one of the archaea up close. Here's another one, seen under a microscope. This is a person floating in the Great Salt Lake in Utah. You ever been there? There's so much salt in this lake that people can just float. And because the salty water is real heavy, and so things can float on it that would normally sink. And you wouldn't think you'd find any bacteria living there because it's so salty. Bacteria don't like salt. But they're called halophiles. Halophiles are the ones that live in salt. There's me and my sister on our trip to Yellowstone that we took when I was 9 years old. That's my mom over there. See, so I did go there. That's proof. There's me by the Rift Geyser. Again, age 9. I think I was 9. See the pants and the shoes. That was kind of style. That was in style at that time. There's us looking at a hot geyser, a hot water. There's me. Mom's got the polka dot dress. My sister looks like a picnic table there. There's us right there. See, you can actually walk out on these things next to the hot pools. And there's a geyser going off right there. There's me. All this white stuff you see back here is salt. Salt left after the real salty water comes up and evaporates and it leaves the salt there. There's the family again in front of one of these salt deposits. But this is a good location to find these archaea. But you don't find them in most places. They're extremophiles. This is a slide just listing some of the differences between You Bacteria and Archaea. The cells of You Bacteria contain Peptidoglycan. The cell walls of Archaebacteria do not. Two groups of organisms have different lipids in their plasma membranes and different types of fats. And their ribosomes and RNA are different too. The mechanics that make proteins in the cells are different. But you can read about that. I don't want to spend too much time here on the notes. Let you read about it. This is the body of one of these bacteria. And you can see what they have. They have an outer cell wall. You can see an outer capsule. There's a capsule on the outside of a lot of bacteria that kind of protects them, a fatty capsule. And then there's the cell wall that kind of holds the shape of the bacterium. The cell wall is a very tough structure. That's the thing that contains the peptidoglycan, the cell wall. In plants, the cell wall is made of cellulose. In bacteria, the cell wall is made of peptidoglycan. And then under that's a plasma membrane. They have DNA, that's the blue stuff. There's the single chromosome. They have one single looped chromosome. And then sometimes they have plasmids, other small loops of DNA off to the side. We studied plasmids already. And they have ribosomes for making proteins. That's what I was talking about earlier was different. The ribosomes of bacteria are different than the ribosomes of archaea. And then you got your flagella here that whip back and forth and move the bacteria along like a tail. And then the pili, these little hairs here called pili, help the bacteria stick to things. And they can also, some of them are hollow tubes that are used to exchange DNA with other bacteria. It's bacteria sex. They can take these plasmids and pass them through these pili sometimes, if the pili is like a hollow tube. Bacteria sex. I'll show you some video footage of it in just a second. The bacteria come in different shapes. Round bacteria are called cocci. Rod-like bacteria are called bacilli. And spiral-shaped bacteria are called spirochetes. Cocci, bacilli, and spirochetes. You may have heard of strep throat. That's streptococci. That's round bacteria like this. Strepto means they're in a line. Streptococci. There's streptococci right there. See how they're round bacteria, but they're linked together in a row. Streptococcus. Video footage of bacterial shapes.
A bacterium of rod-like shape is known as a bacillus. A spherical bacterium is a coccus.
I'm starting it over.
A bacterium of rod-like shape is known as a bacillus. A spherical bacterium is a coccus. And a spiral-shaped one is a spirillum.
Wasn't that awesome? Chrissy, would you say that is awesome?
Yeah, that was awesome.
See? Chrissy agrees to everything I say. She's a good student. Okay. I already showed you the flagella for movement. Here's another picture of a bacterium with a flagella. It allows it to move. There's the sex pilus. The sex pilus is this hollow tube through which DNA can pass from one bacteria to another. And these little hair-like structures are called fimbriae. that helps bacteria attach as well. Some bacteria have these hair-like structures called fimbriae, as well as the pili. This shows how a bacterium, and by the way, we're on page 520 now. 520. This shows how a bacterium divides itself. It starts as a single cell. It then copies its DNA. And now we see there's two copies of the DNA. The blue stuff there is the chromosome, the DNA of the cell. Copies its DNA, and then it divides down the middle, and now you have two copies. It's just basically like mitosis. Just goes like that. We call that process binary fission. It happens very fast. Some bacteria can reproduce once every 8 minutes. Most bacteria more like once every 20 minutes, but it's still fast. So here you see first we copy the chromosome. This is just a different picture of the same thing. And then the cell divides down the middle. And I have video footage of that. Whoops. Here it is. Okay, it's kind of scary.
Bacteria reproduce very simply and rapidly by doubling their contents and splitting in two. Just one bacterium, dividing every 20 minutes, could produce nearly 5,000 billion bacteria in one day.
So that process, that was pretty cool, wasn't it? I like to play with this one. Now that was greatly sped up. That's about 4 or 5 hours, just spread into 15 seconds. But you can see how fast bacteria can multiply like crazy. And that's what an infection is. Have you ever had an infection? Chrissy, you ever had an infection?
No.
You never have?
No.
Come on. If you've ever had an infection, or if you've ever been sick, you may have had bacteria multiplying in your body. You cut yourself, you get bacteria in there, they start multiplying like that. And so you have to take antibiotics or drugs that kill bacteria. Also, if you leave food out, if you leave food just sitting on the counter like some I don't know, egg salad or something like that, the bacteria just grow like crazy inside there. And that's why your food spoils. Because bacteria are growing like crazy inside it. So what do you do to keep your food from spoiling, Chrissy?
Put it in the refrigerator where it's
Put it in
cold.
the refrigerator where it's cold, because bacteria can't multiply very fast in the cold. You see? It's all making sense now. This is why you don't just eat a sandwich that's been sitting on the ground for a few days. It'll be full of these bacteria, and if you eat those, you'll get sick. Now your stomach is made to deal with some bacteria, but if you get too many in there, it'll overwhelm your system. Your stomach's very acidic, so it'll kill most bacteria that you eat. So if you just eat a few bacteria, you won't get sick. But if you eat a whole lot, then they'll get through your stomach and into your intestine, where they'll cause really bad diarrhea. Ew. Now here's two bacteria having sex. This is called conjugation. That's a sex pilus. And this bacteria might pass DNA over through that to that bacteria. That's bacteria sex. Video footage. You want to see video footage? Video footage of bacteria sex.
Sometimes the F plasmid becomes integrated into the host cell genome. The host cell is now referred to as HFR, which stands for high frequency of recombination. The HF...
Okay, that's pretty boring, so I'll just do it here. Here goes some DNA. It's going from the bacterium on the left up. They come together. And then that piece of DNA is passed along to the other one. That's bacteria sex. Did you see? You want to see it again? Here we go. Two bacteria come up. Up. There's the piece going in. Bacteria sex. Okay. That's how bacteria have sex. Here's some words you need to know. Photo-autotroph. Autotroph means to make your own food. Photo means light. So some bacteria make their own food by sitting in the light doing photosynthesis. Photo-autotrophs. Then you have your chemo autotrophs. Those are bacteria that make their own food by breaking apart chemicals that are found in different locations. Like, for instance, the hot thermal jets at the bottom of the ocean. They found these things called deep sea ocean vents that spew up chemicals out of the center of the earth. And there are bacteria there that break apart the chemicals, which have high energy bonds, and use that energy to make food. We call those chemo autotrophs. Usually the compounds that they're breaking apart are nitrogen and sulfur compounds. They break those apart to get energy instead of using light to get energy. So chemo autotrophs make their own food by breaking apart chemicals. Photoautotrophs make their own food by using sunlight. And the word aerobe means a bacterium that has to have oxygen. And the word anaerobe means a bacterium that doesn't want oxygen. Some bacteria die in the presence of oxygen. They're called anaerobes. And some bacteria need oxygen. They're called aerobes. Obligate aerobes have to have oxygen. Obligate means you have to have it. You're obligated to have oxygen. Obligate aerobes have to have oxygen. Okay, on page 521, it talks about how bacteria can make spores to help them survive. Here's a bacterium here, and if the conditions ever get really bad for bacterium, they can take their DNA, which it doesn't show here, but there's DNA inside the bacterial cell. It can take its DNA and surround it with a hard covering called a spore. And the spore is a hard covering that surrounds the DNA. There would be DNA here. And the rest of the bacteria just dies. And the spore can survive some really harsh condition. It can survive extreme heat. It can survive extreme salt. It can survive dry conditions where there's no water. And sometimes it can survive for millions of years. So there are bacteria that the conditions go bad and they form these spores, and then later when the conditions become okay, the spore germinates and builds a new cell from the DNA information that's inside the spore. And so bacterial spores are very hardy things, so it's hard to kill bacteria. To make sure you kill bacteria, you got to cook your food, for instance. If you take meat, there might be some chicken or something, there might be bacteria in there. And if you eat it raw, you run the risk of getting sick from the bacteria. But if you cook it above a certain temperature, I think that temperature is 121 degrees Celsius, which is 260 something degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. If you cook it above that temperature, you'll always kill all the bacteria and the spores. So you can't get sick from it. Here it shows some bacteria that are forming spores. The blue things are spores. Video footage of spore formation. Enable all. Is there anyone out there saying enable all? I'm not going to do it because last time I did that it messed it up.
Spore-forming bacteria grow as vegetative cells and divide by binary fit.
Okay, we don't want to hear his voice, so I'm going to do this. So here's a bacterium. It's dividing just like normal. Conditions become bad. There's the DNA right there. It breaks off a little bit of it and forms a spore. And the spore hardens, and the rest of the cell dies. And there's the spore. Wasn't that interesting? No, you say? Well, maybe you're not interesting. Have you ever thought of that? No, you haven't. Now you have. I'm just making jokes to myself. And for Chrissy, but she's not laughing. Chrissy, you still awake?
Yep.
Is this exciting?
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes bacteria live on the roots of plants. And it talks about this on the bottom of 522. Some plant roots have these nodules that contain bacteria. Bacteria living in the root nodules. And the bacteria will take nitrogen from the air and make it so plants can use it. See, plants need nitrogen in their daily lives. And normally plants can't get nitrogen straight from the air. They got to get it from the ground. And the type of nitrogen that's in the air is not usable. It's called N2. That's a very tough molecule. It's hard to get the nitrogen from that. These bacteria can take the nitrogen out of the air, tear it apart, put it in the soil, and make it so the plant roots can pull it in. And so you don't have to fertilize plants that have these nitrogen nodules. And we call plants that have these nitrogen nodules, these bacteria-containing nodules on them, legumes. Have you ever heard of legumes before? Beans are examples of legumes. Peanuts. And these crops, soybeans, clover, alfalfa, these crops are often planted, and then they plant soybeans one season, and then the bacteria in the nodules put a bunch of nitrogen in the soil, and then the next season they'll plant corn. And the corn sucks all the nitrogen out of the soil. And then the next season they'll do soybeans again, and the nitrogen is put back into the soil by the bacteria. And the next season they'll plant corn again. And what do we call that, Chrissy? Do you remember? Crop something. Crop rotation. Good. That was invented by farmers because they don't want to have to fertilize every year, buy a bunch of fertilizer and put nitrogen in the soil that way. They let the bacteria do it. This shows some of the E. coli bacteria that's found in your gut, in your intestines. In your large intestine right here, there's a bunch of E. coli bacteria. They look like this. There's trillions of them. And any food that makes it through your digestive system that you don't eat, the bacteria will eat that. And they're real happy to do it. And sometimes they make a gaseous waste product. And that's like when you eat and you have gas. And there's only one way out for the gas. The rectum. Isn't that gross? So that's who to thank for your gas, these bacteria. We call that the normal flora. Everyone normally has bacteria living in their gut. Most of the bacteria that live in you or are harmless and are called normal flora. There's also bacteria living on your skin that are harmless. 1 square inch of skin has something like 100 million bacteria living on it. But they're harmless. So look at it this way. You'll never be lonely because you got the bacteria with you. Do you see? Some foods are made with the aid of bacteria. Cheese, yogurt, buttermilk, pickles, vitamins. All are bacteria are used to make those types of foods. And it talks about that on the bottom of 523. And many of the diseases that you get are caused by bacteria. Some of the diseases, if you think about infections, if you've ever had an infection, I'll show you some pictures of infections here in just a second. But if you've ever had a bacterial infection, it can kill you. As a matter of fact, before antibiotics were invented and used in great amounts, most people died from infections. And back then, people would have like 10 kids, and 5 of the kids would die from infections. Now, most people don't die from infections because you can take these drugs called antibiotics. They're drugs that kill bacteria. So usually if you get an infection, you don't die. But I'll show you some infections if you don't take antibiotics, what happens here.
Here's the plan. We get the warhead and we hold the world ransom for $1 million.
Mister. That's not a lot of money.
Okay. Bacterial diseases. That's an anthrax infection. He's got anthrax on his chin. This is, I don't know if you remember, some terrorist was mailing around anthrax spores in envelopes. And people would open them and there'd be white powder in there. And if the powder gets on you, it causes an infection. There's the anthrax infection. You got to take antibiotics to kill that. It's not really usually fatal if it's on the skin, but if you breathe in the spores and they get into your lungs, you could die. Several people died from that terrorist mailing around anthrax spores. There's a bacterial eye infection, gonococcal infection of the eye. Most often this condition is seen in newborns who acquire the infection as they pass through an infected birth canal. Adults, however, can also transfer bacteria to the eye from the genitals. Gross. Another bacterial eye infection. It's called trachoma. He's got bacteria in his eye. It's the leading cause of blindness in the world. You could go blind because bacteria growing in your eye. Look at this. This is gangrene. These are toes. Somebody's toes have turned black. That's because bacteria are growing in there eating up the toes. Isn't that gross? That's what used to happen before antibiotics. Remember, you cut yourself and your mom goes, put this on there so it won't get infected. And you go, oh, Mom, I don't want to do that. This is why you do that. Or you get gangrene. Gingivitis, that's what happens if you don't brush your teeth. It's bacteria living in your gums. They multiply and cause your gums to swell up. By the way, anytime you see itis at the end of a word, that's caused by an infection. It's inflammation caused by an infection. And when itis is at the end. So, like appendicitis, your appendix is swollen up and infected. Laryngitis, your larynx is swollen up and infected. Can you think of another itis, Chrissy? Putting her on the spot. I don't know. I can't think of another one. There's other itis-I. There's leishmania. This guy's got leishmania. Bacteria infecting his skin. Leprosy. Big bacterial infection right here. You ever heard Jesus cured the lepers? They're talking about leprosy. Look at that infection there. The infection causes you not to be able to feel your fingers and toes, and then some people will lose their fingers and toes because they'll have them, put them on a hot pan or something, and they burn out without them ever feeling them. Or get them cut off and they don't know to pull away from something that's crushing them. Madura foot, that's somebody's foot. Madura foot can be caused by true fungi or actinomycetes fungus-like bacteria. Lesions filled with pus and pathogens may distort the foot to the point at which amputation is necessary. Those are toes. Isn't that gross? Strep throat, infection in the back of the throat. There's the yellow-colored bacteria living in the back of somebody's throat. Verruga, somebody's legs with bacterial infections on them. Yaws, somebody's legs with more bacterial infections. Staph infection. You've probably heard of these staph infections. They can kill you too. Very dangerous. There's the dreaded white infection. Completely white. It's a joke. There's nothing on that slide. Another staph infection. Scalded skin syndrome in an infant caused by Staphylococcus aureus. Reddened areas of skin peel off, leaving wet, scalded-looking areas. That was gross. Impetigo, a highly contagious infection caused by Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, or both together. You ever seen somebody like that? You don't want to get too close to them. You could probably figure that out just by looking at them. Diphtheria, that's another mouth infection. Tetanus. A soldier dying of tetanus, an all too common cause of death in the days of cavalry troops. The extreme contraction of all muscles from those of the face to those of the toes is a classic symptom of the disease. This is why you get a tetanus shot, or all your muscles will lock up and you end up dying. So, the moral of the story is, don't get infections. Take your antibiotics. The problem nowadays is because bacteria are evolving resistances to antibiotics. It's kind of scary. There are some diseases you can get where no antibiotics work on the bacteria. They evolve resistances rather quickly because they get random mutations that allow them to survive the antibiotic. So we have to keep coming up with new antibiotics to save lives. Okay, so read 18.1. For the rest of the class period, you can start that reading section. Thank you very much. Willis out.